Like, I don't know a lot, but I know one thing. If Tyrion Lannister had this kind of training and prowess, Game of Thrones would have ended a heck of a lot differently.
My fate is to love her from afar.
We must let her decide our fate. She must have the choice.
And today we have Cyrano. Technically, this movie came out in 2021. I thought I was done with those releases. I think it made the rounds in 2021, like film festivals and isolated releases, but it seems to not have made any sort of any national recognition or rounds until early this year, 2022. Even to the point where I had to go to an indie, my local indie Arthouse theater to be able to see this. 2 weeks straight, I just only watched The Batman. Not every day, mind you. I've only seen it twice, soon to be 3 times, but it's because nothing else was major was playing. I had seen it, and then I was like, well, what else? And we got a bunch of stuff coming up in the next few days. I was like, well, you know what I've been missing out on are funny enough, my indie film reviews get the most views, Ghostbusters notwithstanding, but Pig and Drive My Car, the views are chalking up. So I was like, you know what? Support the arts. Put my money where my mouth is. Cyrano came out this year, directed by a Joe Wright. So I didn't know the name. British filmmaker, I believe, but this guy's resume, the films he's done, his list is stacked. I mean, a lot of work. More recent release, he directed Darkest Hour, that Winston Churchill, kind of fiction, non-fiction adaptation of historical events. And then way back in '05, he did Pride and Prejudice, which every woman I know of typically likes this film because it sets impossibly high standards for romance, and I'll never measure up to Mr. Darcy, apparently. From what I understand, Cyrano is based off of a short story or book. I did not do research, but I know his name is Cyrano de Bergerac, and that's about it because the movie told me. Normally, if I'm familiar with the source material, or if it's an adaptation I'm familiar with, I will speak on it based on my personal opinion. Something like Resident Evil or Uncharted, I can speak to. But as the case with Drive My Car, I never read the original source material, so inherently my review is based on this movie as purely its merits go as a film, not as an adaptation. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Before we get into pros and cons on how I felt about it, 3 main actors in this film. Granted, there's other supporting cast, obviously, but here's the thing. If you knew anything about this movie, from a trailer, from a poster, from anything, yes, Peter Dinklage is starring in this film. Who is Peter Dinklage? Come on, you know. Tyrion Lannister, Game of Thrones. Everybody knows who this guy is at this point. He is arguably, now that Game of Thrones is a thing, he is now the world's most recognizable dwarf. And I'm checking now just to make sure I don't get any hot water. Washington.edu, dwarf, little person, person of short stature. I'll call you whatever you want me to call you. I'm using the term dwarf. I'm very well aware that midget is not okay to say. I'm pretty sure it's not okay to say anymore. Dwarf. We're gonna leave it at that. I don't know what the fuck else to say. If there's a better word, correct me. I will change the nomenclature. You know this guy. Of course, he's a powerhouse of an actor, but I'll get into a little pet peeve I have in a minute. It's not about him, but it's about the culture surrounding him. Aside from that, we have our titular lass, the redhead herself. We have the beautiful Haley Bennett, who has been also in plenty of things. Most recently, and notably, said best known for Hillbilly Elegy. I didn't catch it, but it said Amy Adams, you're probably gonna cry when you watch this movie. And then one that I did watch and I highly enjoyed, Devil All the Time. And if I recall, although she wasn't a highlight performance for me, I believe she still did a great job. I don't think there were any bad performances in that film. So, just as well, we have our third party in this very poetic love triangle, Kevin Harrison Jr., who I did not recognize. This guy, in terms of what you know him from, what I would know him from, he was the son in It Comes at Night, and I loved that movie. But most recently, and probably more importantly, he was also in a starring role in the, I believe it was on Netflix, The Trial of the Chicago 7. I need to watch that. It's been in the list for a minute. I'll get around to it someday. So, getting into Cyrano. I saw the trailer and I thought, oh, looks interesting. I didn't know until like reviews started coming out that this was like a pseudo musical, hence the title of the video. It's like not really a traditional musical, in my opinion. Cyrano is a musical in the same way that La La Land is a musical, but the difference is I loved La La Land. I thought it was good. I thought it had, out of all 3 acts, I thought that like by the end of it, things got a little bit iffy. I think overall, like it's not bad, but enough cons get into the mix where I start questioning it, like just how good it is, you know? The pros, great performances. I mean, again, I have no qualms. Peter Dinklage always steals most scenes that he's in. This is no exception. I thought that all 3 of the main cast, supporting cast, everybody does a great job. There's emotion, obviously romance in it. I mean, hell, Haley Bennett, she has a whole musical number where she's like, basically like overcome with the like physical pleasure from the romantic inclinations coming out of these letters she's reading. I mean, she's like caressing herself, she's doing a whole thing in bed, like it's a thing. But like everybody, there's emotion, I feel the passion. I don't feel like these are actors giving me a performance. I felt like there was just legitimate love and care coming from these people. Like I got that. They did a great job. It's mostly period authentic. Clothing, setting, production design is good. Language, I mean, come on. You can't be the witch. You can't be the lighthouse. You can't be Robert Eggers and get everybody to do, like, to the nth degree, like, ye old English or what have you. Like, there's still a lot of American nomenclature used throughout, but not so much so that it's distracting. It just, I do find that it kind of eases that translation for a more American audience, you know? Because it's kind of like, you know, English American, and it's not going to be 100% period authentic, but the clothing and the visuals and the setting and the time period, it tracks enough where you're roped in and you're there for the ride. One of the pros, there are 2 or 3 solid bangers in this. There's a bunch of songs. I think the score, in terms of like the musical numbers, are hit or miss, but there's a couple really good standouts. You could argue 3 good standouts, but 2 that really, I think, seal the deal. It's kind of like Encanto, right? Like, I'm not saying the whole soundtrack for Encanto is bad, but like, there's 2 songs that really everybody is singing. I gotta admit, again, it ties into a con I'll get to in a minute, but the musical does feel very human. Like, there's still a fantastical element to it. It almost feels like it might be fantasy, but it's not. It's drama, musical, romance. But there's, especially with how I'm about to describe Peter Dinklage's performance, there's a very human element to it that I appreciated throughout. Whether it succeeds wholly in its mission, that's to be debated, but the human element's there. Admittedly, I got emotional. This film really resonates in a couple spots, and I kind of got caught up in it. I got a little bit misty-eyed. I'm not in the back row ugly crying necessarily, but I will admit, this film did evoke emotion out of me. And if a film can do that, like in my opinion, then it's got to be good for something. And if anything, it's good, again, the romance, the emotion, the passion, you kind of feel for the plight of your main characters here, especially for Peter Dinklage. Cyrano, that's the whole point. You're with him on this. Where the cons get into the things, what did I put for my notes? Yeah, maybe Peter won't be on American Idol. I'm not saying Peter Dinklage is a bad singer. His singing ability in this made me immediately think of Russell Crowe in Les Miserables.
Stars in your multitudes, scarce to be counted.
I wouldn't say it's bad, but there's a reason why he's an actor, not a singer. I do not claim to be a singer. If they put me in this film instead of him, I would have been in the exact same shoes. They're trying to make me sound good. I'm trying to sing a certain way so I sound better. It's a weird mixture of the 2 things. Like, he's not belting out these big Hugh Jackman show-stopping numbers or whatever, or Anne Hathaway. Again, I'm leaning. Let me get out of Les Miserables for a second. He's not, like, immensely musically talented. He's not bad either, though. I can just kind of tell I'm like, well, this isn't his strong suit. Like, acting, it is. And that's what he is. But because, at the same time, He's a poet, he's an actor in this movie, and he's just also like he just seems like a good guy, like a generally good human being. Prideful maybe, but a good human being. So even though he can't sing too well in my opinion, it still feels very human when he's doing it. Like when someone you care about sings your little ditty that they wrote for you and they're not a good singer. It's the effort, it's the thought and the romance of it that's there, and that's what resonates. And so that's what kind of it gives him a pass for me. It didn't sink the film. I was just like, oh well, that doesn't sound fantastic, but it's very heartfelt. There's emotion. A lot of the songs were lackluster. Granted, La La Land is no like Chicago, right? La La Land just kind of, there are some songs that you've seen, Another Day of Sun, What a Waste of a Lovely Night, and but a lot of La La Land is like just mostly orchestration with a few musical numbers sprinkled in. This film is kind of that, the score didn't stay with me, but there's like 2 songs that did stay with me that I was in for, and a third song towards the end that was mostly more spoken verse. In fact, a lot of the music in this film is almost very West Side Story, the OG West Side Story, where it's like awkward transitions into a song based on what was dialogue, then poetic verse, and then all of a sudden singing. In West Side Story, it was like, we're gonna get those guys. That's those guys we're gonna get. And with this one, it's like, I love her so much she'll never know. She'll never know. And I'm just like, whoa, we're in a song now. It was like similar vibes, much better than the OG West Side Story in my opinion, but that's not saying much. Again, I'm not the authority on musicals here. I'm not like an avid Broadway attendee, but I'm just saying there's a few standout songs, but a lot of this, especially Ben Mendelsohn is in this, and I love Ben Mendelsohn, and he's a great actor, as he is in this. He has probably one of the worst, villain songs I've ever heard. It's just so, it's just so meh. It's not bad. It doesn't really have, a consistent, unique flow to it. It just kind of happens, and it's like he's, salty and lamenting to himself. It's weird. You gotta watch it. The third act feels a little bit clunky and rushed. It's, again, not bad, just things toward the end of the film happen very suddenly. A couple moments where you're like, where's the logic in this scene? It just kind of ends suddenly, and just it doesn't, I don't know, it didn't kill the movie for me, but it certainly brought me out of it a bit. I was like, oh, we're here now? Oh, this happened? Why'd this person do this? And then by the end of it, I'm like, well, this is just, and this is my next point, it's unnecessarily tragic. It's an unnecessary tragedy, very a la Romeo and Juliet. I don't love Romeo and Juliet, and I think the ending is it's Shakespearean tragedy. Easily preventable narrative. That's just this. If people stopped for a second and gave it some thought, or I don't know. I feel like the way that this movie went, it makes sense, but at the same time, it's everything that happened in this film could have been very easily avoided if people just communicated properly. But I get it. You have to have the romantic tension. Overall, I'll leave it at this. Overall, I think Cyrano is worth a watch, albeit maybe not in a theater. I saw it in a theater as I tried to see all the films that I see for the first time. I wasn't a waste of my money. I thought it was a decent time. There's better musicals to watch, better Peter Dinklage performances to watch, but I think you can stream this one or maybe rent it at some point in the future. Like I said, it's not a bad watch, just one that I would say you shouldn't be in a hurry to go see this. All that being said, I would say Cyrano is feeling generous. Like I said, it's not bad. I would give it a high 3 out of 5. A high 3 out of 5 for sure. The film is above average, it's not just, this is a musical. I would watch it again, and it got me emotional. There's great performances. It looks good, sounds good. There's some solid songs in it. Like I said, there are better musicals out there. There's better Peter Dinklage performances out there. And the one gripe that I have, and it's something that it's not even a gripe. It's more just out of human empathy, basically. I wish that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and if I'm barking up the wrong tree here. I wish that Peter Dinklage would continue to get great roles, but roles that has a character that's one of their narrative traits doesn't have to do with the fact that he is a dwarf. I wish it was just say what you want about what's that movie called where it's I do care, I care a lot, or however. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but Peter Dinklage was great in that. Unless I'm mistaken, it's been a minute since I watched it, didn't stick with me. I don't think they his height was like a huge narrative driving point. He was an antagonist. Well, he was antagonist, one of the main characters, and he just happened to be a dwarf. But I'm glad they bring attention to the fact that like such as something like, you know, prejudice or racism or something, it needs to be addressed because it's actively happening in society. But I wish that in all those cases everybody could just be treated as equals. Like, you have someone with a handicap, right? You just don't talk about the handicap. Just like treat him like you would treat anybody else. It's like, I wish it was the same thing with him. Like with him being a dwarf, you know, we don't need to talk about it. We get it. He's a dwarf. Here's his character. Let's move on. That's all I got to say. Thank you so much for watching my review of Cyrano. What'd you think? Comment below. And yeah, stay tuned for the next video review that I do. Movie review. Whatever. But anyway, goodbye, travelers.